In 2508, the planet-cracking operation on Aegis 7 would encounter something unexpected, something alien, the red marker. After removing the marker from its pedestal, the colony would be rocked by a high-pitched noise. The frequencies would react with the minds of all who would hear it, prompting those with unitologist ties to commit suicide within Union Square. This event would send ripples through the colony, shocking all who would bear witness to the terrifying images being presented to them. However, what would transpire within the following week on the planet would be an event that all could never have seen coming. Homicides and work-related accidents would end up spiraling out of control, setting the scene for the continuation of a dark and disturbing takeover. The planet crack would proceed as normal with a no-fly order being set up by Captain Matthias of the USG Ishimura. Shortly after this, communications would cease between the colony and the ship, which soon made the colony fall into madness, with some colonists becoming insane, attacking others, spurred on by the effects from the marker. With PSEC squads spread out all over the place, the end was near with the revelation of the recombinant lifeforms known as the Necromorphs. The colony was in complete panic with people piling into the trams, trying to get to the shuttle bays. People that were successful in getting into the shuttles would find only death, as the weight was too much for the engines to compensate against, leading to the shuttles to stall within the air and fall back into the bay, destroying the rest of the ships. Gabe, Nathan McNeil, Lexine Murdoch, and Warren Eckhart would travel through the megavents and get to a shuttle after a brief encounter with the hive mind, and would soar into the upper atmosphere. After exiting the planet and crashing into the hull of the planet cracker, they would enter the ship to find that they had not in fact escaped, but just entered a new form of hell. They would eventually have a brief encounter with Elisa Vincent, where she and her team would take them into custody and leave them in Nicole's containment. Nicole would run her tests and come to the conclusion that they were safe to be around, biologically speaking. She would soon accompany them to the morgue after McNeil had lifted the containment lockdown on the other side. However, after traveling through this part of the medical bay, they soon encountered more necromorphs, including a tentacle that had burst forth from the inner workings of the ship. The crew would retreat back to the main hub and seal the tentacle away with a barricade to further protect themselves. This is where Nicole would make the fateful decision to stay in the medical bay, stating that her place is with her patients instead of joining the extraction crew. This would lead her to eventually committing suicide on a transmission addressed to Isaac that would bait him into trying to find her within the corrupted and demented halls of the Ishimura. However, what could happen if Nicole had left the medical bay with Gabe and his companions? Could she have been betrayed, killed in an unfortunate encounter, or could she have in fact escaped the nightmarish pandemic? Well, let's explore these possibilities, shall we?
I really wanted to see you again. Just once. I loved you. I always loved you. Isaac, it's me. I wish I could talk to you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about everything. I wish I could just talk to someone.
Nicole would see that staying in the medical bay while it is infested by the necromorphs could be a losing battle to help those within need. She would be willing to sacrifice the patients in regards for her own survival, as yes, she would feel responsible under normal circumstances to stand by the patients, but she would tell herself this is a dire situation, as those things have spread throughout the ship, and there would be no stopping them at this point. Perhaps with the extraction crew she could gather more survivors and battle for their own self-preservation against this unholy agency spreading among them. The extraction crew's journey would mimic the same as the original timeline of events. The crew would see that the tram is not functioning as it should be, and would need to find an alternative means of getting to their destination. However, the shaky plates of the trench would begin to give away, and the crew, followed by Nicole, would fall into the sewers of the ship. Lexine would eventually become under attack from a swarm of smaller necromorphs and be separated from the others. After a battle with a monstrous necromorph, the crew would eventually end up inside the main hub of the hydroponics deck, where they would reunite with Lexine. However, this is where things would change in the story. Nicole would volunteer to stay with Catherine Howell and help her in sealing the necromorphs inside the sewer line so that they could not pursue them any further. The crew would eventually leave, but not before Gabe would thank her and hand her a pistol to protect herself and Catherine from anything that could hinder their progress. The two would exchange a conversation between themselves as they worked, talking about the necromorphs and what they would do if they survived their ordeal. Nicole would say that she would seek out her boyfriend, Isaac, and as Catherine was about to answer, a loud banging could be heard coming from the ceiling that would put the two on edge even further than before. The noise would continue, as if something was trying to break open the plates themselves. Catherine would succeed in her task, sealing the sewers away, and Nicole would say that she thinks they have overstayed their welcome. As she opened the door, bracing herself for what could be on the other side, there would be nothing but the empty hallway and display units, when a huge tentacle like the one from the medical bay had spewed forth from the ceiling, grabbing hold of Catherine. Seeing this, Nicole would attempt to pry her leg from the tentacle's grasp to no avail when she would shoot it, forcing it to release Catherine, but as it did, it soon swung around and struck Nicole, knocking her to the ground. Catherine, in her panic, would flee to the upper tram station until noticing Nicole's absence. She would run back to the door only to hear gunshots and Nicole screaming as the tentacle wrapped its smaller tendrils around her hands, cupping them together. The room would soon fall into lockdown due to the hazardous anomaly entering the room. Catherine, in a race against time, would try to get the lockdown to release. With its prey within its bloodied grasp, it shook her left and right until the gun slipped out of her hands and the tentacles started to pull her towards the opening it had forced its way through. As Catherine had managed to open the door, she frantically looked around with her heart racing, only to see Nicole's legs dangling out of the ceiling with her muffled cries, and as soon as she was about to grab her, Nicole would slip into the corrupted domain, as if the ship itself had just consumed her, and slowly her screams and cries had faded and were no longer audible. In her decency to save those around her, it seemed death had its eye fixed upon her. If the tentacle could not have Catherine, it would surely whisk Nicole off her feet and into her own demise. Who knows what could have happened to Nicole after this? Perhaps the tentacle would force her through the corruption as if being swallowed by it. Perhaps it would be like being swallowed by any other animal dragged down the throat and into the stomach, to be transmuted into more corruption or a new form of necromorph. Maybe the tentacle would drag her into a chamber where the surrounding corruption would begin to shrink around her, crushing her elegant form into something spawned from as many nightmares. Perhaps through the anatomy of the Leviathan we could learn more. However, perhaps some things are better left alone. I think that would be a fitting end to Nicole, as she has always been one to try and help people who are less fortunate than herself. But let's see what would happen if Nicole's story did not end here.
It's all falling apart here. I can't believe what's happening. It's strange. Such a little thing. In the end, it all comes down to this one little thing.
After a battle with a monstrous necromorph form, the crew would eventually end up inside the main hub of the hydroponics deck, where they would reunite with Lexine, and the story would continue as normal, with Warren abandoning Catherine to the tentacle that spawned out of the ceiling, gripping her within its unholy embrace. As he would reunite with the rest of the crew, they would question him about Catherine's fate until a wave of necromorphs were approaching them. With the tram operational again, they would board it, leaving those horrors behind. The team would shortly split up in an effort to find a way off the ship, with Lexine and McNeil getting off the tram at the flight deck, leaving the others to find a maintenance shuttle elsewhere. After fighting off a swarm of necromorphs, Gabe would command that the sergeant opens the door, when an exploder would suddenly drop from the ceiling and does what it does best, killing the sergeant and blasting the room that shatters the windows, allowing Gabe, Warren, and Nicole access to the room. Gabe would discover the console had taken damage. He would go on to say that someone has to go down to the lower level and flip the launch hatch manually. As Gabe tells the pair to sit tight while he completes this task, Nicole would say that she is going to go into the shuttle to do some diagnostics while she waits for the others to arrive. However, sometime later she would eventually start hearing something, hearing someone talking, and begin investigating into what is going on, when she would overhear Warren speaking to an official of the Church of Unitology. Hearing of what he had done to Catherine, she would begin to back away until knocking over some boxes, alerting Warren to her presence. As he walked out, he would see Nicole with her backing away towards the shuttle, but would stop as soon as she saw the gun in his hand being lifted and being pointed in her direction. She would ask how he could do this to her, why he saw Lexine worthy of whatever he had planned, with Eckhart stating that Lexine seems immune to the marker's influence, that Nicole has seen it too, hasn't she? Much like the statement he would go on to make towards Gabe in the original events. He would exclaim that he was sorry, but there cannot be any witnesses to his plan, and shoots her. However, just as he does this, Gabe overhears the shot as he walks back into the room. Holding his pistol out, Gabe does not hesitate to shoot Warren for his treachery. In her last breaths, she would beg Gabe to tell Isaac that she is sorry and that she loves him. He would agree to tell him that she was a worthy companion through this hell. She would thank him in a raspy voice as the air escaped her lips. The life from her eyes would then shortly fade, and Gabe gently closed her eyes. Now that could have happened, as I think Nicole would have been intrigued by the sudden chatter coming from outside of the shuttle, and would investigate, but in Warren's revelation he would end up killing her. However, there is still one more outcome to explore.
I didn't want it to end like this. I really wanted to see you again. Just once.
Gabe would hold Nicole. Seeing her wound was not fatal, would tell her to tell Isaac herself, and would claim that she was going to be fine, and would lay her to rest inside of the shuttle. Lexine and McNeil would eventually come back to see Warren dead and Nicole wounded. Gabe and Nicole would tell the pair of the betrayal, and the story would continue as normal, with McNeil preparing to leave for the bridge. Nicole would tell him that she can help him before moaning in pain. McNeil would tell her to rest, and would tell Lexine to look after her. Sometime after Nathan had successfully disabled the ADS cannon, a horde of necromorphs could be heard rampaging through the halls of the deck, along with a loud clanging and scratching coming from the vents. Gabe would tell the two women to keep their voices down when the necromorphs had breached the walls and were coming for them. This would lead into Gabe defending the shuttle and the pair of women held inside. Nicole would pick up a pistol and assist Gabe even though wounded. She couldn't bear to witness Gabe be torn apart without her doing something to help him. This act of bravery would inspire Lexine to help fight off the recombinated crew to a certain degree. The necromorphs were poised to claim their flesh. With each of them being taken down, more and more would continue their onslaught through the room until a familiar sound broke through the hordes. The sound of a contact beam could be heard. Initially, Gabe thought one of the crazed crew members had gotten a hold of it, until seeing Nathan returning to them. As he boarded and Gabe noticing that he was missing his hand, they closed the doors and they soon released the docking clamps, holding them in place, and fled the hell within the Ishimura to finally have the peace and tranquility of the space ushering upon them. Nicole would ask to see Nathan's arm, but he would say he would get it checked out when they arrive at the sprawl, and would claim that he is now officially retired. When a transmission would break through the silence leading into the events of Dead Space, but with one difference. Isaac would not be aboard the Kellion, as Nicole had never contacted him. This could lead into a bit of a problem, as if it was not for Isaac, then the outbreak would never have been stopped, and Kendra would have most likely have succeeded in her mission to claim the marker for the unspecified organization she was working for. Regardless, the ending to Dead Space Extraction would continue as expected. Nathan would turn into a slasher and be dismembered by Lexine or perhaps Nicole. The group would end up at the sprawl, and this is where Nicole would part ways from Lexine and Gabe. She would contact Isaac and she would eventually meet him and tell him the grisly tale she had just lived through. Over the years, Nicole would become a doctor within the sprawl, sticking close to Lexine and Gabe, and Isaac would get an apartment there too, so he could be with her, unknowing of the horrors coming back to haunt them in the future. Well, there you have it. These would be the outcomes for Nicole leaving with the Extraction crew. Well, at least how I think the outcomes would happen, how it would change the story to a certain extent. Perhaps in the future I will bring a part 2 to the third outcome, to see what would happen in Dead Space 2. Or perhaps a video explaining what could happen in Dead Space if Isaac was not a part of the emergency response team. However, for now, I will leave you all with these outcomes. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, then hit the like button. Comment your thoughts and what ifs down below, and I look forward to hearing from you. Sign up to join the British Alliance today by subscribing and ringing in the notification bell for updates on future content such as streams, posts, and videos. And I will see all of you awesome people on the front lines. And have a good one.